She was born in a town where the air always smelled of damp earth and forgotten promises. Her name was Eleanor Vance, a name as delicate as the woman herself, or so it seemed. The world saw her as a paragon of serenity, a wife to a successful architect, a mother to two beautiful children. Her days were a tapestry of morning coffee on a sun-drenched porch, school pickups, and elegant dinner parties where her laugh was the music everyone wanted to dance to. Life, to everyone else, was a symphony in her honor. But the notes she heard were dissonant, a low hum of dread that no one else could detect. The strangeness started subtly, as these things always do, a flickering light that no one else noticed. The whisper of her name in an empty room, a sound so faint it could have been the wind. These were the small cracks in the veneer of her perfect life, hairline fractures that only she could see. Her husband, Robert, a man with a mind as precise as his blueprints and a smile as disarming as the sun, would dismiss her concerns with a gentle squeeze of her hand and a reassuring phrase. "Just tired, my love," he'd say, his blue eyes full of concern. "You've been working so hard on the new gallery exhibit." The gallery. It was her sanctuary, her passion. Eleanor was an artist, her canvases a riot of color and emotion. She painted faces, not just their features, but their souls, their hidden fears and desires. Her latest series, The Unseen, was a critical success, each portrait a deep dive into the human psyche. People would stand before her work, mesmerized, seeing a reflection of themselves they hadn't known existed. But lately, when she stood before her own canvas, her reflection seemed to warp, to twist into a grotesque mockery of herself. The woman smiling back was a stranger, her eyes hollow, her skin pale, a silent scream behind a painted smile. The true turning point came on a cool autumn evening, the kind that promised a crisp new day. Robert was at a late meeting, the children asleep upstairs. Eleanor stood in her studio, a half-finished portrait on the easel. It was a portrait of a woman named Lillian, a quiet, reclusive neighbor. She had barely started the eyes, yet they seemed to stare back with an unsettling intensity. Eleanor set down her brush and walked to the full-length mirror leaning against the wall, a heavy, ornate piece from an antique shop. The glass was old, slightly mottled, and she loved its imperfections. She gazed at herself, trying to capture the feeling of the night air, the scent of petrichor on the breeze. But the reflection wasn't hers. The woman in the mirror had her face, yes, but the expression was wrong. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror, a look Eleanor had never seen on her own face. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a plea, a silent cry for help. Her lips were parted, as if to form a word she couldn't speak. A chill that had nothing to do with the open window ran down Eleanor's spine. She reached out, her fingertips trembling, and touched the glass. The reflection moved in perfect synchronicity, its hand meeting hers, but the look of terror remained. It was a different person entirely, trapped behind the glass, using Eleanor's face as a mask. Eleanor stumbled back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She looked away for a moment, then back at the mirror. Her reflection was normal again, the serene, beautiful woman everyone knew. Had she imagined it? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She told herself it was exhaustion, a trick of the light, the stress of the exhibit. But the image of that terrified woman wouldn't leave her mind. It was a seed of doubt planted in fertile ground. The next morning, she tried to talk to Robert about it, but the words felt absurd, even to her. The mirror, it showed me something, she began, but she couldn't finish the sentence. He listened patiently, his hand over hers, his smile a well-meaning shield. "Maybe you should take a break, my love. You've been pushing yourself too hard," he said, and the words, meant to be soothing, only felt like a dismissal. It was a dismissal she had heard before, a quiet way of saying, "Your reality is not my reality, and therefore it is not real." That day, Eleanor started to notice other things. Her favorite silver locket, a gift from her late grandmother, was missing. She searched everywhere, but it was gone. She mentioned it to Robert, and he said he hadn't seen it. but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief, unreadable expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was the same look she'd seen on the face of the man who had bought her a ring with a stone she found unsettling. The one who always seemed to know her next move, the man who was her husband. She began to feel like a puppet, her strings being pulled by an unseen force. Her actions, her thoughts, they didn't feel entirely her own. She'd find herself in the kitchen, making a meal she didn't remember starting. She'd walk into a room and forget why she had gone there. These weren't the harmless slips of memory people often experience. This was a deeper, more unsettling kind of amnesia, as if another person was inhabiting her body for brief moments. One afternoon, while working in her studio, she was drawn to the portrait of Lillian. She hadn't touched it since that night, but now the eyes were finished. They were her own eyes, but they held the same look of terror she had seen in the mirror. Who had done this? The door was locked, the window sealed. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She wasn't just losing her mind. Something was actively trying to take it. The mirror hadn't just shown her a reflection of fear. It had shown her a reflection of a truth she was about to uncover. A truth that would shatter her perfect world and reveal the monster hiding in plain sight. Eleanor's horror was no longer a lurking ghost. It had become an undeniable companion, a raspy voice whispering in her ear in every waking moment. The house that had once been a fortress of peace now became a maze of distorted truths. Every corner could hide a secret. Every sound could be a clue. The disappearance of her locket was just one of many grains of sand slipping through her fingers. Now, familiar objects started to vanish and reappear in strange places. Her hairbrush on top of the refrigerator, a book she was reading in Robert's drawer, her car keys hanging on the coat rack. Robert still smiled, still reassured her, but his eyes no longer held the same concern as before. They were like mirrors, reflecting emptiness, an emptiness that Eleanor was beginning to realize was his true nature. She started to search, frantically, not for the lost items, but for evidence of her own sanity. She rummaged through drawers, in Robert's closet. What she found wasn't the dark secret she had imagined, but a frightening emptiness. Everything was neat, perfect, to the point of not having a single trace of life of a real person. He had notebooks, but they only contained architectural drawings, notes about his work, nothing about who he was, his thoughts, his emotions. They were the books of a robot, not of a human. When she touched his laptop, a thought suddenly flashed in her mind. Although she had never touched it, she knew the password. She knew it because it was their wedding date, a sweet thing he had once told her on a romantic evening. But when she typed the password, it didn't work. She tried his birthday, the children's names, and countless other numbers. Nothing. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was a password she had never seen, and it was something she knew, but where did she know it from? That's when she remembered the portrait of Lillian. The eyes in the painting, her eyes, didn't just show terror. They showed desperation, realization. They were like a signal, an encrypted message that she hadn't deciphered yet. Eleanor returned to the studio, her heart pounding. She looked at the painting, staring into those eyes. A crazy thought flashed in her mind. She approached the easel, touched the face painted with frantic brushstrokes, and she felt an inexplicable urge to flip the canvas over. Behind the portrait of Lillian on the rough canvas were words written in pencil. It wasn't her handwriting, and certainly not Lillian's. It was someone else's, someone who had been in her studio. The writing was simply a string of numbers. 10031985. Someone's birthday? Possibly. She knew the birthdays of everyone she knew. Robert's birthday? May 1980. The children's birthdays? No. Her birthday? November 1983. She tried typing that string of numbers into Robert's laptop. The screen flickered, then displayed an encrypted folder with only one file. When she opened the file, a series of images and videos appeared, revealing Robert's horrifying secrets. They were secretly recorded videos, not of other women, but of Eleanor. They were secretly recorded in her own house, in the studio, in the garden. They showed her laughing, talking to the children, painting. But these videos weren't just normal footage. They had been edited, Every moment seemed to have been staged. It was as if he was documenting a film about her life, a film in which he was the director and she was the unwitting leading actress. Then, she saw photos of Lillian. Lillian was standing in Eleanor's studio, with an empty expression, as if hypnotized. And then a video shot from Robert's perspective. The video showed Lillian holding a paintbrush, her hand painting the terrified eyes on her own portrait. It wasn't Lillian, but someone else. And it was a man in a hoodie, his face covered. Suddenly, Robert entered, his face no longer holding the gentleness she was used to. He stared at Lillian and gave her an order. "Do as I said." His voice was not his normal voice, but a cold, robotic one. Lillian, didn't say a word, just nodded. Robert turned to the man in the hoodie, who immediately took a knife and cut a lock of hair from Lillian's head. Lillian didn't have any reaction. Robert asked the man to put the lock of hair in a small glass jar and keep it carefully. Eleanor felt her stomach clench. Robert wasn't the kind man he pretended to be. He was a manipulator, a master puppeteer. Lillian wasn't a reclusive neighbor. She was Robert's victim, a puppet he controlled. And now, the mirror, the locket, and Eleanor's memory lapses all made sense. He was doing the same thing to her. He was turning her into a puppet to serve his dark purpose. Robert was trying to turn Eleanor into the version of Lillian he had manipulated, after having completed his experiments on Lillian. Everything was a play. The perfect life, the dinner parties, the sweet words. It was all a stage he had set to hide the truth. He had turned Eleanor into an object to control, a specimen to experiment on. He had painted a smile on her face, and then slowly, little by little, he had stolen it away. When Eleanor saw the next videos, she felt the blood in her body turn to ice. Robert had experimented with Lillian, and when he had finished his work, had controlled her, he had discarded Lillian like a piece of garbage. Lillian didn't disappear. She had been murdered by Robert. He had buried her body in a garden next to Robert and Eleanor's house. Suddenly, the front door opened, and Robert walked in. "I'm home, my love," he called out, his voice full of feigned warmth. Eleanor closed the laptop, her heart beating like a forgotten drum. She turned around, trying to force a smile. Everything in her wanted to scream, to run away, but she knew she had to stay calm. She had to act. She had seen the truth, and now she had to face it. The smile on Eleanor's lips was a fragile mask, a weak shield protecting her from Robert's gaze. She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, she saw a stranger. This man, with his elegant appearance and charming smile, was not her husband. He was a monster hidden in a perfect shell, a puppeteer waiting for his puppet to break. She had to remain calm. The fear had turned into a cold adrenaline rush, making all her senses sharp. She had to think, to plan, to escape. "You're home late, Robert," she said, her voice sounding surprisingly normal. "Is everything all right?" "A little issue with the design," he said, his smile unchanged. "But everything is resolved. Do you want something to drink, my love?" "No, I'm okay," she said, and she didn't look him straight in the eyes. He had taken the locket, had hypnotized Lillian, had killed her and buried her. And now he was doing the same thing to Eleanor. He was trying to take over her mind. She knew he wanted her to become Lillian, a perfect puppet, a woman stripped of her free will. Eleanor remembered another video on Robert's computer, a video that horrified her more than Lillian's death. That video was about her. Robert had secretly installed cameras in the house, and a video had captured her working in the studio. He had recorded the process of her painting Lillian's portrait, but something was wrong. He had secretly added a substance to her coffee. Then, he had ordered her to paint, he had controlled her like a puppet, and he had controlled her to paint what he wanted, and he had controlled her to voluntarily take off the locket she loved. He had made her have temporary amnesia, making her think she had done those things herself. He had created a parallel reality, a distorted version of her life, just for him. Suddenly, she heard the children's voices upstairs, the sound of their feet running and their laughter. A new fear surged within her. What had he done to the children? Was he planning to do something to them? She had to protect them. She had to escape with them right now. Eleanor pretended that she was sick. She said she had a headache and needed to go to bed early. Robert, with a face full of fake concern, agreed. He kissed her on the forehead, and the kiss felt cold and malicious. "Sleep well, my love," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." Eleanor went up to the bedroom, locked the door, but she knew that door was not a real barrier to Robert. She had to act now. She opened the window, looking down at the street. There was no one there. She climbed out, clumsily slid down and ran to her car. She unlocked it and got in, her hands trembling as she started the engine. But when she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw Robert standing at the bedroom window, his smile cold and terrifying. He knew what she would do. He had known everything. A moment later, Robert walked out of the house, walking normally as if nothing had happened. He didn't run, he didn't scream. He just walked towards his car, like a predator confident that his prey cannot escape. Robert drove, following Eleanor's car, but he had no intention of catching her. He was playing a game. He was waiting for the right moment to catch her. Eleanor drove frantically, without purpose, without a specific direction. She just wanted to get away from Robert, away from the prison he had created. But he was always there, always behind her. She tried to call the police, but her phone had no signal. Robert had done this. He had cut off all her connections to the outside world. She felt desperate, trapped, with no way out. Then, she realized something. He had done something to her car. The steering wheel became difficult to control, and the car started to go in a different direction, a direction she didn't want. She tried to fight it, but the car was too strong. She realized that he was controlling her car remotely. He had turned her car into another puppet, a tool to take her to a place he wanted. The car stopped at an abandoned house in the suburbs. Robert had parked his car at a safe distance. He got out of the car, smiling, his face calm and smug. "Welcome back, my love," he said, his voice full of mockery. "We have a little chat." He had planned everything. He had created a trap, and Eleanor had walked into it easily. She had fallen into his trap. Robert walked closer to her car. He roughly pulled her out of the car. Eleanor tried to resist, but she was no match for him. He had locked her in the abandoned house. When Robert closed the door, he looked at her with the eyes of a winner. "You did very well, Eleanor," he said. "But you still can't escape me. Now you will be mine forever." He turned away, and Eleanor heard the sound of the lock. She was locked in. She was trapped. She had become a puppet, and Robert was the puppeteer. Inside the abandoned house, the air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. The windows were boarded up, and sunlight only entered through small cracks. Eleanor was tied tightly to a chair, her mouth gagged with a cloth. Robert sat opposite her, on a rickety wooden chair. He no longer had his elegant, trustworthy appearance. His face was now a mask of madness, his eyes sparkling with insanity. "Do you know what you've done?" he said. His voice no longer the familiar one, but a creepy whisper. "You've broken our play." He began to tell his story. He had found Lillian many years ago, a vulnerable woman, easily manipulated. He had experimented with her, trying to control her mind, erase memories and replace them with the memories he wanted. He had succeeded. Lillian had become his perfect puppet, a tool to satisfy his dark desires. But Lillian had died, he said, in an accident, an unforeseeable accident. "And then I found you," he said, his voice full of craving. "You are an artist, a woman with a deep soul. I knew you would be a much harder challenge. But I succeeded. I turned you into a version of Lillian, a better, smarter, and more beautiful version." Eleanor tried to resist, but the chair was too sturdy. She felt hopeless. She couldn't do anything. He had won. Robert stood up, went to a table and took out a small glass jar. Inside the jar was a lock of hair, the very lock of hair that the other man had cut from Lillian. "This is Lillian's soul," he said, his smile distorted. "And soon your soul will be here too." He turned back to look at her, his eyes full of cruelty. "Now look in the mirror," he said, and he pointed to a small, cracked mirror on the wall. "See what you will become." In the mirror, Eleanor didn't see her reflection. She saw Lillian, with her empty eyes, her expressionless face. It was a terrifying sight, a sight she couldn't bear. She had known that he wanted to turn her into a version of Lillian, but now she saw it with her own eyes. But in that moment of desperation, Eleanor remembered something. The portrait of Lillian, the portrait she had painted. Robert had forced her to paint it, but he didn't know one thing. Eleanor, in a moment of lucidity, had hidden a message in the painting. A message only she and one person could understand. She had painted a small symbol hidden under the paint, a symbol that she and her best friend, Clara, had created when they were children. While Robert was talking about his plan, about how he would turn her into the perfect puppet, Eleanor tried to do one thing. She had used a small piece of glass from the cracked mirror on the wall. She had used it to cut the ropes. Little by little, she tried to cut the ropes, while Robert was still engrossed in his crazy story. And then, a sound came from outside, the sound of a police siren. The door was broken down, and the police stormed in. A woman, with blonde hair, blue eyes sparkling with anxiety, ran to Eleanor. It was Clara. She had found Eleanor somehow. She had found the portrait of Lillian and had deciphered the message Eleanor had left. Robert was arrested. He didn't resist. He just stared at Eleanor, his smile still terrifying. "You can't escape me," he said, his voice full of threat. "I will find you. I will start over." Eleanor, with Clara's help, was freed. The police found Lillian's body buried in Robert's garden. Everything was over, but the story was not completely over. Eleanor had been freed, but she was no longer the Eleanor she used to be. She had seen the dark side of the world, of people. She had seen a monster hidden in a perfect shell, and she knew that those monsters could exist everywhere. And when she looked in the mirror, her reflection was still Eleanor, but her eyes had changed. The eyes that had once held serenity now held a fear she would never forget. It was the fear of someone who had seen the truth, of someone who had survived being manipulated by a madman. And when she looked into those eyes, she told herself that she would never let that happen again. She would live, not as a puppet, but as a human being, a woman who had found her strength in the darkest moments. And the story of Eleanor, of the mirror, and of the monster in the perfect shell has ended. But do you believe that sometimes the scariest stories are not about ghosts or demons, but about people, about the dark secrets they hide? If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss other scary stories.